Faust is one of the most important stories of our time, the iconic tale of the deal with the devil, Mephistopheles, where man sells his soul. It is fitting that this story came to prominence at the time of the Enlightenment era, as it coincides with Nietzsche's narrative that God is dead. Man of the Enlightenment sold his soul for technological advancement, for progress, and for his own ego. Like Dr. Frankenstein, Faust was more preoccupied with the fact that he could, that he didn't consider whether he should, much akin to modern man in his hubris. Don Quixote is another relevant tale. While it is portrayed as a comedy, there is a tragic dimension to the story. It tells of a completely demystified world. Don Quixote is the world's last knight, and he has yet to get the memo. That being that everyone around him merely laughs at his attempts to see reality in a romanticized light. His chivalry is met with mockery. The people he tries to help flee in terror as they view him as a lunatic. The fair maidens that he admires are actually prostitutes who snicker in amusement at this delusional man. These stories have stood the test of time as they've remained ever relevant. But hold on, are these only stories? Or are they myths? Faust, Don Quixote, and Frankenstein for that matter, have attained a mythological status, despite being only a few hundred years old at the very most. We tend to think of mythology and legends as only pertaining to much older folklore, such as Norse myths, Greek epics, and biblical stories. But I think this is because we, in the Western world, cannot see ourselves, only what is outside of us. Marshall McLuhan has a concept that reflects what I mean. The idea is that a fish cannot conceptualize water, since it is all around them. Only when removed from the water does it no longer take it for granted. So the parallel is that we take our own culture for granted. It is invisible to us because it is all around us. We can only conceptualize of cultures outside of us, and thus we only give legitimacy to their myths and their legends as being quote-unquote actual myths and legends, since we view our own myths as either being self-evident truths or simply banal pop culture with no significance. But in actuality, Nietzsche's God is dead may in fact be the origin myth of the modern Western world, and these Enlightenment era stories are becoming our legends. So, let us explore the mythology of the West, the electric folklore of Faustian man. Take Star Wars, for instance. Anakin is Faust. He is ever striving, longing for more than his station in life.
I want more, and I know I shouldn't.
He even makes a deal with the devil in typical Faustian bargain fashion. And what happens when Mephistopheles comes to reap his soul? Anakin becomes Darth Vader. He becomes Frankenstein's monster.
It's moving. It's alive. It's alive. It's moving. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. He's still alive. Lord Vader, can you hear me?
I would even suggest that Anakin is also Don Quixote. He has a romanticized view of things, which is met with amusement by those around him.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel.
You're a funny little boy.
You fell into that nightmare, Master, and I rescued you, remember?
Yes.
Given that Anakin's heroism and romanticism are not only met with derision from his superiors in the cold and sterile, materialistic world that he finds himself in.
Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
You are asking me to be rational. That is something I know I cannot do.
How can you be on the council and not be a master?
Take a seat, young Skywalker.
But also met by mockery and laughter from the audience, finding endless amusement in his poetic meanderings about sand.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
I think that this comparison to Don Quixote is quite fitting. My obsession with Star Wars aside, I just propose this as a manifestation of these centuries-old stories still maintaining relevance beyond merely being outdated pop culture artifacts. Our myths were right under our noses all along. Our cultural cringe and self-loathing in the West make us look elsewhere for meaning, whether we get into anime or the Poetic Edda. Ironically, the Faustian spirit yearns to cross seas and oceans for this knowledge when it is right in front of our eyes, and we refuse to see it. Much like Dorian Gray, who cannot bear to see his rotting portrait, Faustian man will look everywhere, but within. God is dead is not a mundane fact like atheists would claim. It is an ethos of the Western world. It is a mythos that we live under. It is the tragic condition that we abide by. Other cultures believe in a living God or gods, but we believe in a dead one, and we are constantly in mourning. The king is dead. Long live the king. And so the cycle repeats. A dead culture worships a dead god. Joseph Campbell speaks of the reoccurring motif in myths of the Father and how it symbolizes meaning, much like God the Father. He even talks about Star Wars, funny enough. The reason that the revelation of Darth Vader being Luke's father has such an impact is that there is an implication that Luke's destiny will end up the same, as the Father symbolizes the meaning for the Son. In more literal terms, the Father provides a template in which the Son can emulate. That may be a bit reductive, but you get the idea. Anakin had no father, which I do believe is symbolically significant.
Who was his father?
There was no father.
His destiny is up in the air, and it's why the most famous song in the prequels is called Duel of the Fates, as he has no single determined destiny. It is also notable that the saga ends with Luke mourning his father. I know the idea of Star Wars being our mythology is often met with ridicule, especially in our cynical and ironic times. But perhaps it is the ultimate life-affirming act to find meaning in our consumption. Pagans of all types could find meaning in the meat that they consumed. Yet we cringe and deconstruct everything, especially that which we consume, as problematic or predictive programming. Faustian man is never satisfied with an inherent meaning. He always crafts his own. That is the tragic fate which he is condemned to.